Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for coming to be a part of our first of our Lunch and Learn series. My name is Napoleon Bell, and I am the Executive Director with the City of Columbus Community Relations Commission. And we have a Lunch and Learn series every year here at 1111 East Broad Street to better inform the communities and have a dialogue on different topics that impacts our city here in the City of Columbus. Our Lunch and Learn series for this year is Building Intergenerational Communities. And today's topic is Redefining Age and Generation. Now, as I said, this is a series. So we will also be having on May 15th, dealing with the workplace, on June 19th, education, and on July 17th, dealing with families. So we're looking forward to having a good long conversation in each one of these areas involving building intergenerational communities. Also, let me just briefly tell you about what our office does so that you understand what the Columbus Community Relations Commission is here for within the mayor's office. We house the New Americans Initiative, working with the refugee and immigrant populations here in the city of Columbus. We enforce the Civil Rights Code in the areas of housing, employment, and public accommodations. We also work in the area of police community relations, community engagement and empowerment, and also do the trainings for cultural competency and inclusion here internally, but also externally in the private sector. So we have a wide variety of things that our office does here to impact positively the community here in Central Ohio. So I want to, again, thank all of you, and I want to thank our panelists for being here to have this important conversation in regards to building intergenerational communities. So let's get started. And to do that, I'm not going to be facilitating, but we will have a professional facilitator who is actually one of our commissioners here with the Columbus Community Relations Commission, one of our 23 commissioners that guide us and guide our office in working. And also she's going to introduce one of our other commissioners that are here also. But without further ado, I would like to present our commissioner, Fran Frazier, to facilitate this conversation. Thank you so much, Fran.
Thank you, Director. Good afternoon. My name is Fran Frazier. I'm chair of the Education Committee of our commission and happy to be with you. Before I begin, I want to thank Commissioner Brown for being here. He shows up for everything, and I really appreciate that. We all do. Nice to have you. So today we're talking about redefining age and generation and the whole idea of intergenerational living. Now, I think that when I was growing up, which wasn't that long ago, and I think you've also hear people say, you know, we were growing up, there were people who cared about us in the community. They supported us. If something happened, they would tell our mom, and then by the time we got home, our mom would be on us, that kind of thing. And somewhere along the line, our community started spreading out, and families started spreading out, and neighborhoods started changing, and the ownership for the elder, especially elderly, and our young people, that ownership that the community had for each other somehow started ebbing away. But what we know is a community is healthier when elders are supported, when young people are supported, when parents are supported in the things that they have to do, when our schools are supported by the people who live in that community. So today we're going to have a great discussion. Deborah Shanosky from AARP is with us. Hi, Deborah. Michelle Tarastano Amato Oberlin, which is, if you didn't know this, was the best intergenerational city for 2013. Oberlin. Michelle is the Director of Creative Art Therapy and a dementia specialist, Kendall at Oberlin. Jenny Hoover is the Director of Kendall Early Learning Center at Oberlin. Maggie Spangler, Executive Director of Columbus Early Learning Centers, and Kimberly Braswell, Director of Student and Community Engagement at Bexley Schools. Very nice to have you here. So, what I'd like for you to do is to just introduce yourself and tell us why you're committed to this dialogue today about intergenerational communities. What value does it hold for you, and why do you think we really need to start having these kind of conversations? Deborah, you want to start?
I work with mature workers, trying to get them training in the community and into competitive employment. I'm a mature worker myself, and I do believe that intergenerational communities ensure that everybody in the community is valued and respected, and they encourage individuals from all ages, cultures, generations to share their talents, their resources, their wisdom with each other for the overall good of the community. And it really allows our citizens to grow up and old with safety, independence, and well-being.
I'm Michelle, and I'm from Kendall at Oberlin. And my role has always is in more of the recreational therapy. I'm an art therapist. And one of the things over my 21 years at Kendall has been the integration between our college and our greater community, as well as our youth in our community, and the bridging. And one of the things that makes me passionate about this is understanding that there's a wake-up call. In the next couple years, there are more older adults over the age of 75 living in our country than under. So we really need to get a grapple on how our society is going to change, and and that means multi-generational living.
Thanks, Michelle.
I'm Jenny Hoover from Kendall at Oberlin. I work with Michelle to do an intergenerational program on our retirement community and also with the community. So we're planning many activities on-site and off-site for the children to interact with all ages, from college level to seniors in the community. And I am passionate about this because I've seen the way that it not only benefits the young children, but also the spectrum of every age. And it's not just one person, it's their family. So it has a spillover effect that really has impacted our community at large.
Hi, I'm Maggie Spangler. I'm the Executive Director at Columbus Early Learning Centers, and we're working with our partners at National Church Residences and The Ohio State University to open our intergenerational center here on the near east side of Columbus. We're really excited about the work that we're doing, and one of the things that has really driven me in this area is the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who works with children who have had traumatic early experiences. But one of the things that he really talks about is the lack of multi-generational living for our young children and the effect that it's having. And we do have a tendency in the United States to create compartments for everyone, and we've been doing that at school for a long time. You know, we have the 6-year-olds and the 7-year-olds and the 8-year-olds and on through. And so something has happened to us because of that compartmentalization that we need to kind of combat, in a sense, by returning actually to a place of multi-generational living. So that's what's driven me to be interested in this and to, in a few short months, be actually doing the work.
So as mentioned, my name is Kimberly Braswell. I serve Bexley Schools as its Director of Student and Community Engagement. This is a new position with the school district, and essentially my charge for the district is to, in a systematic kind of way, respond to all of our non-academic barriers to success. So if you think about where students might have a block, you know, they're having a hard time with their math or their social sciences, things like that. They're even their sciences, all the different subjects. But sometimes the barrier is not actually the academic component. Sometimes it's something else. And so how the world issues find their way into the schools, how mental illness, how addictive behaviors, trauma, all these types of things find their way into the schools and impact student learning. That's my job, to figure out how do we respond to that, not just for one student, but really as a system. And so my commitment to this dialogue is really about wisdom transference. We use the 40 developmental assets to approach and support students for their social emotional wellness. And in looking even at some of the categories for those 40 developmental assets, a lot of it has much to do with community, with students feeling supported by adults. And that also creates purpose for everyone involved in the community. Bexley is very unique in having a lot of multi-generational residents, and so how do we make sure that everyone is contributing to providing the answers? The same things I think we've been trying to solve the whole time, but then how do we solve it in new ways, and how do we honor then the work that's been done in the past? It's kind of Sankofa, go back and get it. So then how do we honor the work that's been done in the past, honoring what's happening right now, and then honoring the voice that young people have and contributing to those solutions. So honestly, my desire is to have wisdom transference and bringing those communities together.
Wow, this is really good. So you all brought up several things that were great. I just don't want to say great words, but things of inspiration, like wake-up call, wisdom transference, Sankofa, compartmentalization. So, if you would, Kimberly, give us a definition of what Sankofa is and what that might look like.
Right. So Sankofa is from, I'm almost looking at this from a symbolic perspective. In West African culture, there's this index of symbols, and there's one, it looks like a bird, and the bird is moving forward and looking backwards. And what it means in literal terms is go back and get it. So while we're moving forward, we remember and honor all the things that came before. Beautiful, idea. And really what I'm looking for with that is some of this work has already happened. I think about, as an example, in some of my, in the diversity hat that I wear with my job, and sometimes I'll be talking with my own mom and having conversations about this, and then talking with my daughter. And so sometimes we're having, even in just processing the work for myself, a multi-generational conversation in how I'm processing my job, and we're all looking at it in different ways. And so then how then do we say, my mom, who's in the boomer generation, her voice is absolutely significant in figuring out, where did this part of the problem, where did this come from? What did this look like 40 years ago? What did we try to do 40 years ago? What did work and what did not work? What things have we let go of that we may need to go back and revisit? That's the Sankofa. I talk sometimes with those who are older. My mom would say seasoned. And sometimes we discuss that, well, people used to actually just sit down and have conversations. Where did that go? There's still value for that. And honestly, young people still want to be able to do that. They're doing it differently, right? And then when you go all the way on the other end, we just recently had this conversation in a community dialogue we had in Bexley. Young people are using social media. And so in the boomer generation, sometimes and even in Gen X, Gen Y, there's this, social media, and it's kind of ruined conversation, these kinds of, but there's some also really powerful things that are able to happen faster with social media. There's in some cases, lives being saved, people being able to express themselves, social justice movements that are happening through social media. And so my interest is, how do you blend those two? Then how do you maybe use social media to bring all of the people in the room to then let go of technology and then have face-to-face dialogue? There's ways that we can maybe have this greater good and bring all of those together, but not without people telling their stories about what worked from their lens.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel like to respond or? talk about the disvalue or the lessening of values because of compartmentalization. Maggie, you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think what this is doing is helping our participants here, as well as the viewing audience, about defining what is intergenerational living, by your own experience.
As we fly forward but also look back, we know society will change, and that's neither good nor bad. It's just change. But we do know that children were raised in these multi-generational units in the past, that as adults grew older and became more seasoned, they also were caring for children. Children were in communities where if you were 3 or 4, you were playing with children who were 6 and 7 and 10 and 12. The list is too long for this discussion to talk about all of the kinds of changes that have caused that result to change. The reasons why you don't see that multi-generational group of children even outside playing together. There are so many reasons. And it's difficult even to define what the impact has been on us because that has changed. But when we look at young children, we start to think it hasn't been a positive one for them. Everything from feeling just an alienation from a different generation to fearing a different generation. We start to look different. We start to do things differently. And if you're not together, those changes are scary changes. And so, just personally, my mom recently passed, and she was in a nursing home. And when you think about how that kind of compartmentalization as well, we do it with the very young. We've got an infant room and a toddler room and a preschool room. And the research tells us that we really shouldn't have those compartments, that children do better when they're all together. But we have all kinds of reasons, monetary reasons, and sanitary reasons, and all kinds of reasons that we think of why it's better to put them in their own groups. And we just keep doing that until the group is people with many years and many health troubles who then are compartmentalized as well. And I think just about everybody knows that doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. So we can't always point to what exactly is not right about it, but we know it's not right. And we know that the impacts are not positive. So I know there are other moments in this conversation to talk about what to do with that. But that's one of the barriers we need to break down, is all of those many reasons why we've done that, and stop seeing those as obstacles that cannot be stepped over or walked around or broken down, because there are so many ways that we can climb over them. We just need to work at doing it.
Thanks, Maggie. Anybody else?
I agree with
You're going to go where I'm going.
I agree as well with Maggie about, I can't say the word.
Compartmentalization.
Yes, thank you. Because as well, the study does show that children do better in across age groups when they're together, not just the 3s are together, the infants are together. So that's one thing that we've done at our site is we've put the children together. 3 to 5s are together. There's no 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old room. And we're in the middle of the retirement community. There's no entering another door to get into, where the seniors are, or the college students. They come in our classroom, we go into their homes, we go into community space together. So I think that's the beauty of it, because it has changed today. I grew up with having all of my grandparents. Some of the kids today, they don't have all of the grandparents, or their grandparents are, not close. So this is a way for not only them, but their families to connect with that person in the community and, have that intergenerational experience, even though it's not their family, per se, but they're still having that experience and benefiting across the generations together.
Thanks. Michelle, you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to try and pull some of these threads that are going around. I've been writing little notes. I love your term because that's what our community, that's the foundation of our values, our mission. That's everything. And how do you then grab that mission and value and bring it to the next level of a city? And that's what Oberlin has been striving for. And then they bring other things like being, our recycling program and our self-sustainability kind of thing. And then what you were talking about with the branching and how you have younger kids with the social media and how quick they are, just like back in my day was, Dad, what do you mean you don't know how to program the VCR? Here, give me the remote. They're the same way with us now with computers, right? And all this other technology with my phone even. So, and yet there's so much wealth in that if we can use Skyping, if we can use the technology. One of my friends just developed a storytelling app where the kids on their iPhones can have this storytelling app, go in, ask the question to ask your grandma. Grandma, let me ask you a question, and it tapes them, and they take a picture together, and it creates a little video right there. And so you get these really cool nuggets that are valuable to us if we know they're out there and we can use them. And our seniors, and I love the word you use, seasoned, by the way. I'm going to have to start using that. So our seasoned adults, they have this wealth of information. And just because somebody retires doesn't mean that they are devalued. And this is where you come so much into play, because that's what your organization is trying to say, hey, we've got this pool of people with all this
historical wisdom.
Yes, exactly.
So in AARP, we have, in the foundation, we have a couple of programs that, it's kind of becoming the buzz around everywhere, but we have a couple of programs. One is Experience Corps, that we go out into schools and actually in many take residents in the school so that we're there all day, and we mentor and tutor K to third grade. And there's statistics that say if kids aren't reading at grade level by fourth grade, they're 4 times more likely not to graduate from high school. And we already know that we're at a critical point in graduation from high school. And we also have a program that's called Mentor Up, which I really love, and it really is kind of co-location again at schools and in neighborhood centers and in retirement senior centers, and it's junior high and high school, so kind of millennials and iGen 15 to 24 that are going in and teaching seniors not only things like technology, teaching kind of cybersecurity, teaching how to avoid scams using some of the new technology, and also doing things like health and wellness, doing exercising and gaming together to try to bring our seasoned workers, our mature workers and citizens up to their level on using all of the technology. So I think it's brilliant, and I do feel like I'm one of them now, but there is so much wisdom, historical wisdom, that comes with just a conversation. So.
That sounds great, doesn't it?
Yes.
Wow, that's wonderful. So Maggie brought up the idea of, or just the truth about this, is that there are challenges to intergenerational living. So what do you think really what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Regulation.
Say more about that, Michelle.
So we're what we call a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community. When you come to us, you're with us for your lifespan. And the regulations on certain areas of our compartmentalization really prevents us from doing certain programs we like to do. There's the Netherlands is doing this really cool program that Jen brought to our attention that we in Oberlin want to try, which is having a wing of the nursing home have Oberlin college students that could live in our nursing home. The problem that we're running into is regulations, because the state regulations don't want to have them there. So how do you then, so we already are hitting barriers to a really beneficial, an integrative bridging program that could really be happening. But because of the regulations, we can't, how are we going to get around it? It's environmentally. So I know even for daycare, Jen can talk, and probably Maggie could talk more about what the regulations on younger people are that, again, are preventing, all of the fingerprinting we have to do, and background checking and all of this stuff that just kind of layer and layer. And if you're an older adult, do you really, why do I just want to go in and do my good thing, right?
Right.
I want to give what I have. I have all of this wealth. I still, and regardless of what age you are, you want dignity and respect, regardless of that age. And how do how do we get through some of this bureaucracy that we've layered on ourselves?
Thanks. Did you want to say anything, Maggie or
Jen?
Right, about those, same thing, when the answer was regulations.
Okay.
That is a big obstacle, because we've looked at just a lot of different things very discreetly. We have different rules for childcare than we have for schools, than we have for a nursing facility. And mixing those regulations together is sometimes almost, if not really, an impossibility. So just following up on that one idea and it seems to make a lot of sense. If we're going to have adults with young children, we want them all to have background checks. That makes us feel safe, and it seems like a good idea. Until you think about the 50-some adults that are going to come every day to our intergenerational center, and they're not volunteers, and they're not staff. They're there receiving their own services in that program, but we want them to be able to have intentional time with children. So do they all have to have background checks in order for us to do things together? And so when you think about it, instead of looking at that like we do, the way we want to be able to look at it is, if we were visiting our neighbor down the street, so that we could sit on the porch and have a conversation, we wouldn't ask for their background check. And that's just totally different than how we're experiencing each of our environments. So we're really, we're asking for, we're looking for kind of a whole different way from where we've come over the past, 50 years, I'd say, in the childcare world in terms of regulation. So that is probably number one, I would say. And maybe secondary to that, just our own changing thoughts that now, the first time we started talking to parents, very quickly, we said, well, but wait a minute, won't they share germs? And people will get sick. Children will get sick. The older adults will get sick. They'll get sick. And we could say, gosh, it's our own fault because we have them in their compartments that now they don't even share germs, and so we're afraid that they will. And so just kind of our own changes in society have then created these new concerns for us that really weren't there before. I don't know if-
Right. And I know Maggie probably has the same issues with us. It's, how many times do they come each month? How many times a year do they come? Are they alone with children? And you go through all this paperwork just to have that interaction. It can be defeating, at times. So regulations definitely. And then, kind of broadening the scope of, trying to get past that, oh no, they're going to share germs, and look at the benefits. There's been a lot of studies done with early childhood lately, and just looking at it from not only their perspective, but the family and the volunteer that's coming into that program is just remarkable. So,
I was thinking earlier, I was telling you I'm from Philadelphia, and I lived on a block where I was just thinking of all the homes I went into on a regular basis. Sat down, ate grapes, or whatever people had. Fran, you want a cookie, or, that kind of thing. And you never even thought about it. And my mother would say, where have you been? I said, well, I went to see Miss Betty, then I went to see Miss White, then I sat on the steps with Miss Robinson. I said hello to Mr. Batts. It has changed. And I was wondering if any of you could talk about where do you think that societal shift or that change of lens began to happen?
well, I may be dating myself, but I feel like when I was younger, like in the 80s, is when there was like the kidnappings and all of that. And so we went from being able to, walk 10 blocks up to the ice cream store and get candy to, okay, you need to stay closer to home. And then it's just kind of gotten worse as time has gone on to where now, with my children, I'm like, well, you have to wait for me to be outside with you because you never know, and something can happen in the blink of an eye, where my parents would go on buses across town by themselves and, come back at dinner. So I think the whole safety and the trust of others in your community, and like you said earlier, people looking out for you, you don't have neighbors that are saying, hey, by the way, did you know, your child was, kind of getting in trouble or, whatever anymore. Everybody kind of stays into their space and their home. And so it's not them looking out for the community anymore. It's, oh, that doesn't have to do with me. I'm not going to, pay attention. So I think we need to get back to looking out for each other and taking pride in our community and our space to get back to that instead of being cooped up and worried so much about safety. And
Thanks, Jenny.
When we were talking about some of the challenges, my perspective, my lens tends to be different. And one of the things that I was thinking about is that there's this misalignment. That I think there's a clash between mission, vision, and values in all the different generations, which then creates a clash in approach and how you approach these big, big topics, not just things that are logistical, but like just principle and how one approaches these different things. And so I think that shows up in communication, like how one communicates and what we value or don't value in method of communication, method of gathering, how we're defining different things, how we define this is good and this is bad, this is right and this is wrong. And then if you have the clash before you ever bring anyone together, then the approach ends up being all over the place. And then so there's then not some kind of collegiality, no collaborative way of even implementing changes, implementing new ways to solve problems. And then so it falls apart, I think, before you begin because you can't get all the wisdom at the table. Here's a small example of this. If the generations don't have any alignment regarding mission, vision, and values, then you define the problem differently. So then, let's say, for example, if you talk about how recently I was part of a conversation, we were just talking about in the educational system, you know, we need to increase how many minority teachers are in the classrooms, right? To me, this actually, part of the solution that I gave was an intergenerational solution, right? Which never even came up. But part of the challenge is that there was basically one lens in the room, you know, and we didn't like, where are younger people and older people, and even just talking about what that would look like. So, and quick example of this, my in-laws had former careers and then went back and then went into the classroom as teachers, right? So they went in as older teachers to begin their teaching career, but then what you ended up having, and no one purposefully recruited them, right? But they ended up being phenomenal teachers. This is, you have a black man teaching math who used to be an engineer. Right. That's powerful, but no one intentionally recruited him. He just found that path. What if someone would have intentionally recruited him? He's not worried about making hundreds of thousands of dollars. He's purpose-oriented. He's focused, but that wasn't intentional. My mother-in-law was a biologist and a chemist, you know, and so she then ended up going into education. She ended up being this amazing science teacher, and then now is an administrator. But and so you have a black female teaching science, you know, in classrooms, urban, suburban, across the board, but she wasn't intentionally recruited. This idea of getting those who were in a second or even a third career to go into the classroom and then differentiate, you know, who you're looking at as your teacher never even came up. And part of that is because there wasn't age diversity in the room to solve the problem. You know, and so then how do we fix these larger issues if we're not even aligned in mission and vision and values to approach the conversation?
But do you think some of that is related to ageism in our society, period?
Yeah, and in both directions, because
Yes.
then there's, you know,
Correct.
these young kids, they don't know, they weren't around, and then those who my mom say seasoned, you know, well, you know, they're checked out. In some cases, they said, well, they're checked out. I have actually talked with, you know, some who said, well, I don't have any kids in the district anymore, so. You know, it's like, well, the problem's still here. Yeah. You know, maybe your children aren't in the district, but, you know, we're still kind of working on this. And so, though you may not have any skin in the game per se, you really do, though, right? Yes. Because you lived through this, and so you know what it was like, and you know these things that were uncomfortable. We still need that voice, so there's collective intelligence to solve the problem. But then if everyone's not valued, and I even think then it's like, maybe the mission, vision, and values aren't so much misaligned, but we didn't even come together to have the conversation to figure out that we have all these things in common, and the approach is just different.
That's one of the main things that I feel like one of the biggest challenges is just getting people together, bringing the right people, and it's local elected officials, community cultural agencies, schools, religious organizations that serve seasoned workers, businesses, families, the young people, the mature people, everyone to the table to develop a vision and a plan. And I'm always the elephant, you know, I'll talk about the elephant in the room. There needs to be some funding for that, because you used a word that I use a lot, is intentional. We have to build a forum to bring the people together to collectively dream up what the vision of what this community will look like, and then have intentional funded activities to make it easier for people to start building on that. I think once you kind of get it rolling, you have to have, it can't be fits and starts, it's got to be intentional all the way along, but as you do it, there are going to be break-off efforts that are going to be brilliant, but we just don't have the collective conversation and the collective vision, mission, dream with all of the important people, all of the valued people at the table.
Okay, so in my head, I've got like a couple of things going on. So actually, there's two questions I want to ask, but maybe the first one is, how does diversity of culture kind of impact intergenerational communities? Because I think every community at some point honored wisdom transference, honored historical wisdom, and were really intentional about it. You're going to spend the summer with your grandmother, right? You're going to get to know all the cousins that you don't know now. Every summer you're going down south. Or in my case, every summer you're going to Long Island. But you're going someplace. And you're going to get to know the people that are in your family. Now, my grandmother lived right next door, but when I would go to her house, it was like I was in a whole nother land altogether once that door shut. But she taught me how to can, she taught me how to cook, and, sew. And so I know that in many different ethnic and cultural communities, there was a real honoring of this wisdom transference and a greater connection with all of your cousins and your aunts. What would that look like to get that back? And how do we stay intentional about intergenerational living from a diversity lens? Because everybody may not be coming to a center. They may not be coming to a program. But what happens, what could happen on that day-to-day level? What would that look like? And I guess that's what I'm asking you to think about. What would that look like?
One of the programs when we went to Generations United that we've been kind of on the back burner in Oberlin wanting to get going is called the Catch program. And it's really a cool idea because families are different now, right? The way they are structured, the way they look, who's in them, who you consider your family. Maybe the state doesn't always consider your family the way you consider your family, right? But it's still your family, right? So one of the areas that is already a given is this, what they used to call my generation, the latchkey kids, right? So we're these latchkey kids, and we still have that bit of a gap, but they're all going into these segregated or compartmentalized, thank you, after-school programs, right, that are run a certain way and done a certain thing. And the Catch program was really cool because what they're doing is they're taking seniors or seasoned individuals in your community, and they're volunteering through either ARP or through another organization, and they come in and we're teaching you a healthy snack after, we're helping you with your homework, and then we're doing all this exercise, and they almost have them for 3 hours after school every day. Isn't that a great opportunity for learning something more than yourself? It's about something more than your immediate. And so here you're pulling your city resources together, and you're trying to create, you have these volunteers and these opportunities. We haven't been able to get it off the ground yet, but that's one of our visions that we're looking at is how do you do this? Because families are so different. Because even for our community, we got families in how many different countries?
Right.
I mean, they're not even, their kids aren't even in our country. They're everywhere. So we got to look at what constitutes, how do we get our society to redefine what family means and be part of and contribute to that core so that all the vision, purpose, mission align.
And can I give a quick example of how this might play
Sure.
out in a day-to-day and using this cultural lens as well? I was part of this really awesome program series last year in partnership with the Lincoln Theater. And we did what ended up being an intergenerational conversation about hip hop And what we did is we talked to kids about, you know, the messages, what does your music mean to you, this whole kind of thing. And then later on, we ended up having the end event ended up being a multi-generational event, right? So here's something that came out of this that shows this is like a random Tuesday, a random Friday, how this could happen in a really beautiful way. So imagine this is, and we'll take hip hop for example, this is one of these things where if you want to split up a room by generation real quick, throw hip hop in the middle of the room, right? And then some people are like, oh, that's rap music, and then they run over there, and then some people are like, oh, it's really good, and well, it was good in the 90s, but it's not good anymore, and so you like people all over the place in the room. Okay, so, but here's then how this can become a really beautiful intergenerational and cultural conversation. You have academic components to these 4 pillars of hip hop. There are 4 pillars of hip hop, right? This, which then could become an educational component. Education, it could be writing, it can be music appreciation, it can be movement, it can be arts. These are actually the 4 pillars of hip hop. And if you break it down that way, then any generation can enter into that conversation through these 4 pillars of hip hop, right? And then there's also this wisdom transference regarding the music appreciation component. A lot of the art of hip hop music is sampling of music, right? So then the first time I have a daughter who's 13, one of the first times she heard Mahalia Jackson was in a sample in a hip hop song. So then I can go back, and we are now having a civil rights movement conversation about a song where there was a sample and she just wondered who the voice was, right? And then this is the first time in history, now that hip hop has aged a bit, where you have 3 generations all listening to the same music, right? You have younger grandparents, parents, and their kids are all listening to the same songs on the radio. They're all listening to the same songs, right? And so this thing where you're just like, this song is horrible, but that parent can then go back and say, when you were 14, what was the song that made your mom go crazy, right? And you ended up fine. You ended up fine. This is just my version of that person. And then pick it apart. What's the message in there? And then talking about the messages, talking about how, did you know that the radio would play this song to tell people what to do for the civil rights movement? Where to go, when the meeting is. That happened on the radio. Did you know that? Did you know how powerful the radio is? That's an intergenerational random Tuesday conversation because all the generations are sitting in the car. You know, you go to take your mom to a doctor's appointment and you had your kid in the car already. We have the sandwich generation. Everyone's listening to the music. Then you have a conversation. It happens. And it can be a bigger conversation.
So I want to mention again, because of that, something that was brought up before, the F word, funding. Yeah. We would all agree that something has changed, that we need to change again. We need to keep traveling and change something and recapture some things that perhaps we have left behind that we know are good, and we want to bring them back along with us. And it'd be great if everybody could just agree on that and in their communities just make that happen. But that's not how it works. How it works is somebody gets an idea and has some funding available to set aside the venue and the time for people to come together at the Lincoln Theater and have this conversation, which can then go out and for free change more people. But in order to really see a change, we have neighborhoods that there's just such a disassociation. And you know, a couple days ago in Bell Fountain, a couple took their own lives, and the neighbors are just left wondering, well, gosh, if I had known that they needed help, I would have done something, but I didn't even know them. And so when our neighborhoods are that disassociated, we have to step in with very purposeful, very intentional, and that requires funding, kinds of things to bring people together to start the conversation so then they can go off and make things happen, because people want to make it happen. When those things happen in communities and you suddenly realize this void, that maybe you didn't realize was there until that tragedy occurs. You want to do something, and that's the time, if we could jump in those moments and say, let's do something to start the change happening. So a community like Columbus has to put a lot of different kinds of resources into it, and money is one of those necessary resources.
I think
Thanks,
too,
Maggie.
to go with that disassociation, is people being willing to go out of their comfort zone to get to know those neighbors, and build those relationships. My parents are still friends with the neighbors that they grew up with, and build those relationships. We have dinner at least once a week with our neighbors. And it's crowded, and it's a lot better when it's warmer outside. But they'll just call and say, "Hey, you know what? I made dinner tonight. Don't worry about it. Just come over at 6." And those are things that people don't do. They don't connect with their neighbors, and they don't respect the fact that even though they're from different generations, they still have many things to offer, and they can still connect in different ways.
Today, the world is so small, and when you were talking about that you would go to your grandmother's or you went to Miss Smith's and sat on the porch, our neighbors look and act totally different than we do. They're coming from every country in the world to live here, and we kind of silo ourselves out of fear and distrust. And I see another layer, so just adding that cultural aspect, and it's a world cultural aspect to it, adds a whole nother layer of how do you bring together people who are fearful and distrustful of other cultures together in the same room. I've been working in workforce development for a long time, and I literally, if I threw a job fair, I don't know another term, I kind of had to get jumped into some of the communities because I needed to have met someone, to have a relationship built, that they trusted me, and then they would send one of the culture in to kind of check out what was going on, and if it was good, then the phone started going, and then you would see a whole community of Somali or a whole community of Hispanics come in. So it just adds such another layer to everything, that it is a small world out there, and our neighbors don't look like they used to, and they don't eat the way that we used to, and they don't worship in the same way that we knew. And so it's just a whole nother layer, and I think more funding and more intentional activities need to be set up, because if we're going to do this, our neighborhoods are really diverse, and we need to be able to talk to everyone who's in the room.
Don't you think our colleges, though, can help bridge some of that? I mean, they're a learning space, right? We have our community colleges. I think one of the nuggets for Oberlin, because we have a very diverse community in Oberlin, and I'm very proud of our diverse community. I think that if it wasn't for the college, I'm not sure how interwoven our community would be. The college brings to us a level of connectivity, and takes on that role, and then helps the rest of the community with the bridging, with the, hey, we're doing the Jones Farm, which is learning how to plant and grow your own food, and then we're going to sell it in the market in town, and we're using college students, and the college students go and pick, get the Kendall residents and the other seasoned individuals in our community, and they go to the farm, and everybody's working together on the farm, and that becomes so powerful. But the farm would have been alone if it wasn't for the college kids being willing to go get the younger kids and the older adults and say, okay, we're all going to the farm and we're working on the farm, and we're going to learn how to plant, we're going to learn how to take care of, we're going to learn about irrigation, we're going to learn about what you do with this food. So it's really, if you don't
Build relationships
and
while
build
they're
those
doing it.
relationships while they're doing these things, and that doesn't cost us any money, but it does. But you have to have the catalyst, for lack of a better word, to create the bridging.
Community partnership.
Right.
I was going to say, I think the reason why higher ed is awesome for that really quickly is because it's neutral turf, right?
Yes.
So if everyone's just like, well, I don't know, and are you going to come over to my place? But higher ed is like a neutral turf. I think here in Columbus, one of the most amazing resources we have is Columbus State Community College, right? It's huge and it's neutral turf. So they can bring everyone together, and you really do at Columbus State, and I'm biased, I used to work there, right? You know, but one of the reasons why it's awesome neutral turf is because they actually naturally, in just their mission of teaching people, they really actually do have a 15-year-old and a 70-year-old, and they're all taking classes in the same place. You know, where you have 25,000 people now, the argument about whose turf it is neutralized because it's everyone's turf. So then if you're looking for this space where someone then doesn't feel like, well, you have to come to me first and then I'll come to you, then don't worry about that part. Just do it in this place. Let this be hosted by some place where their mission is already dedicated to do this community engagement, and then bring everybody there. Start with who's there and then expand it.
Okay, so I just need to say this since you brought them up. We partnered with Columbus State specifically around this issue. So Columbus State Community College is our partner. And when you talked about healthy vegetables and farming and good health care, these are all great plugs right now. Molina Health supplied all of our healthy snacks. So so we wanted to find a way to even our partners, you know, you almost have to be intentional, even with your partners, so that you get the best, even from the people who want to support what you want to do. So that was a great segue for me. Thank you, Kimberly.
I think community partners are key, though, because even if they can't support you money-wise, they can support you. We just had an example the other day. Somebody wanted to work with us, but they didn't have a lot of funding, and they said, we have a radio station. You can go on the radio and plug your programming. You know, give and take and make those community relationships like you did with Columbus State and Molina Health, you know, to mutually help each other, even though there's not, you know, a huge grant that's supporting.
Right, no funding, right.
Like one of the things that we started way back in '96 was partnering with a freshman professor at Oberlin College, and he started teaching the Ars and Moriendum class, and he had to meet all the academic standards, which was making, you know, so he has this class about how aging is treated in literature, right? It's only for freshmen. So then those freshmen are now paired with a resident either in our community or the Oberlin community with a seasoned individual who's living that. And then they talk about all of the literature, how it's treated all the way through. And that piece has become so powerful. And I just went to the American Society on Aging's conference. One of my students is there. She's now working for an agency, an area agency in elderly. And she's like, my experience my freshman year with that class changed my life. How powerful is that? How powerful is that to be able to say, you've affected, and we need to make these opportunities because that's that's the change. That's the change. Sorry.
Oh, no. I think this is really rich, don't you? Yeah, it's really great. Okay, so we have disassociated communities, right? And a lot of times those are the communities that we really want to find a way to impact because we feel they're the most needful of this kind of opportunity. So I'd like for you to kind of share what would the infrastructure need to look like? You know, what kind of commitment and support would really be needed to kind of work in a community or neighborhood where people are not that connected, but the children need it?
I think it comes from a little bit of what we've all said. you know, taking advantage of getting the generations together in that spot, then noticing that there's a disconnect and working on the disconnect, teaching them to respect each other, even though one person may hate listening to hip hop, but respect where it came from and not all of a sudden just discard that person because they're interested in that, you know. And then also the partnerships and valuing, it's everything together. You know, you can't have a program that's prospering if you're not doing all of those things together and respecting and showing value to everyone out of that.
So if you,
I think
oh,
there's-
please.
I'm sorry. I think there's a difference between the partnerships and then the boots on the ground, or whatever they call that, where in your environment. Does your environment hinder? So does it physical environment? Is it ADA appropriate for a seasoned individual? Right? Oh, I triggered something over here. So hold that thought. Hold on to that thought. And then seasoned. And then, or is it? And is it so that the community itself? Have you looked at the physical barriers of your community, your actual, right, your accessibility, your where things are at, how easy is it to get to, how far away is it, can you bike there, can you walk there, can you not? I mean, we're in a little town.
Right. Is transportation needed?
Right. We know transportation's even an issue in our little town. But we really had to take a look at, is there a section of people who are on housing that need assistance, and they are over there, those people over there, and then Kendall's that place way up there in the northern part of our community, and we don't really go there. The community started to intentionally build housing within housing. Okay, so you all of a sudden you've geographically moved the needs, and you've geographically moved people so that they're integrated, because familiarity breeds comfort. Right?
Michelle, talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
So in our community, we've got farm, we've got ducks, we got a lot of geese, and then you've got us, and then you've got a complex of apartments that are what's the word I want to use? Subsidized housing, and then you have regular homes that are person-centered, single homes. Then you got the high school, then you got the middle school, then you got another set of subsidized, very small, almost small house type community, and they're integrated. Everything's integrated, so that so that there's not this section, this bad section, or this good section. It's the whole community. We are one. We are not. We might be little bits and pieces, parts, but we are one. And the way the community is purposefully being developed reflects the actual structure. Reflects that, because you can have a lot of great. We were just talking about this coming down. I can have a lot of great programming for people with memory loss, but if my structure does not support some of my programming, I'm beating my head, right? So we got to have the structure in place as well as the programming. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. That's why Oberlin's the best intergenerational city of 2013.
Thank you.
I think underlying all of it really is, besides having this eye on a really noble goal of mixing the generations to make these neighborhoods, make these communities work, you really need to have workforce and education systems that have career paths in them. You need to have new economic development where people can get jobs locally and want to live in the neighborhood where they work and live. That you have to have affordable housing and mixed income housing, so that every kind of economic level is buying in and they want to live there because that's their community and that's where their jobs are. I think green and that sustainable,
Yes.
green, energy efficient kinds of things are going to be really important, just structurally to make these communities work.
I agree.
I think one of the other things too, though, is when you're thinking about infrastructure and commitments and supporting that these projects look huge, right?
They do.
And I think because it's so enormous, I think what happens sometimes is people get overwhelmed. They say, it's so big, I just can't, they just stop. So I think part of it is sometimes people need to see a success. People join things that are moving versus things that are standing still. And so sometimes I think it's like we want to do 15 things, but can we, and I'm guilty of this because I'm like, I think I can do all of it. And I can't, right? So it's like how do you do this in small, manageable pieces? Can we prioritize what can we do right now? And then I think it's important for people to see a success. So what's the greatest common exactly, And so what's the greatest common denominator? Is there something where in fixing this, it actually improves the entire community, all the different generations, and it makes everyone feel, valued and appreciated and supported and contributes? And, where do we get the greatest gain if we do just these two things first? And then once we can show people that we saw success with this, then, although it may not be the model, it is a model and realize, oh, well, what if we then did this and this and this? But if we're like, looking at, well, we got these 15 things, we got to figure out how to do it, and this is the pot of money, and this, you can give up on the project. Or I think this is how sometimes we have these great things, and you have one little tiny area who's awesome, and everything else is bad. Or you have, this thing, and we did this fantastic work for 3 years and the grant ran out and that was that. It's just like, well, what is something where if you want to see the success, is it small, is it manageable, and is it something that we can sustain? Can we pick the greatest common denominator, do that really well, and then grow from that?
And I think one of the things that also happens is you do the small things and you have successes and you celebrate publicly our successes. And we get really involved in just doing that because we did it well and we're just going to do that and we run it into the ground. So again, I feel like it's really planned activities that are really mindful and intentional, that behind the scenes, while people are getting on board with those small little thing, that one little thing that everybody's doing well, you have to be setting up for your next planned success and your next one so that people will continue to learn and jump on board, but you can't just run one into the ground. And I think we tend to, it's like, okay, everybody's volunteering for this, and so then you kind of run it into the ground. So somebody needs to be that partnership, that coalition that says, well, we've done this, now it's time to introduce a new subject, another small subject matter, so that we can get some of those same people and some new involved, so that then it becomes a mindset of just what else, instead of run one thing into the ground.
Well, what I think is important that I hear about Oberlin's success is that they trusted the people in their community to have the answers, to find the answers. And the answers that work for Oberlin are not necessarily the answers that are going to work somewhere else. So you can't have a group of people who are the experts and know what to do decide. And I think that's what's great about many of the neighborhood efforts around Columbus, is that trusting the people in that neighborhood to have the answers. And then follow that path. And that's why Oberlin's successful.
And having those community centers that then support
Right.
what the people are in need of and what they
Correct.
see as the need.
Right. And you got to figure out how to get them all, everybody to the table. Kendall at Oberlin is actually a Quaker-based organization. So the way we do things is very slow and very thoughtful and very methodical and very committee-driven. I was corrected the other day, we have 92 committees right now just in our community, and that's not even our greater community. That's just on our on-campus. So you have to, everything runs by consensus. It's the way our government was originally set up, which is not working real well right now, but that's the way it was set up. So you have to make sure that each voice has weight. Every voice has weight. And the moment somebody discredits a voice, you've discredited your committee. So you gotta not just bring them to the table, but you have to hear, listen, and give value. Because that one voice might actually be the light of the answer. And it may just be ahead of everybody else.
Thanks, Michelle. Maggie, I wanted to ask you, are there models that can be used in Columbus that you know about that could build that strong intergenerational community or ideas?
Right. I'm not that expert about specific models, and I think we'd all answer yes. And certainly, all of the communities that Generations United and MetLife recognized, like Oberlin, each one of them is, in and of themselves, a model for what to do. And yeah, there you go. I think each one of them is truly a model. And I think we are doing it in Columbus. You know, we are doing it in Franklinton, and we're doing it on the Near East Side, and we're doing it on the South Side. And I think the commonality between all of those is this trusting the people who own those places, who live in those neighborhoods, to find those answers and find the things that will work. And then they can seek out the models and things that have been done, and how do you, I think Kimberly said, the logistical part, is they can seek those models out at that point. But so I don't know, as I look at it, I think, you know, all of those are a model. It's kind of those underlying pieces of how you go about developing your answers that's shared, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to others too?
Makes sense, and your model may look totally different. You may pick and choose different things that work for your community from other models and create your own.
Correct. Because the needs of your community should be what drives the way your model develops.
Right.
And the strengths. Not just the needs, I'm sorry, your strengths too, because if you have certain strengths within your community, to capitalize on those and shore up the weaknesses, isn't that cool?
It is. Deborah, did you have something you wanted to?
Well, I just kind of got asked to be on this panel, and I did a little bit of research, and there is just online a packet that's called America's Best Intergenerational Communities. So when she mentioned she was from Oberlin, I had already read about her and kind of went like this. So if anyone's interested, again, America's Best Intergenerational Communities. And sometimes I get overwhelmed with this kind of thing, and it's a 128-page document. So I printed a few pages for myself, but I have in my career used documents like this, and there is a toolkit, and I read a name that means something to me, and it said Joe Jenkins, and I'm guessing that it's the same Joe Jenkins that runs the AARP Foundation on a national level, had input on this, was a player in this, and it's called Sustainable Communities for All Ages, a Viable Futures Toolkit, if anybody's interested in writing that down, or I would share with that to kind of start from the basics to start putting a plan in action, or take it into a community and have them actually have something to actually work with and write on, whether you follow every step or not, but it's a plan.
We've got a few minutes left. So I want to go back to thinking about what are the gaps in kind of establishing this kind of model in a neighborhood or a community? And then what are the solutions to those gaps?
What do you mean by gaps? Give me an example so I can understand.
So maybe they're not gaps, but what are the empty places that have difficulty getting filled when you are attempting to bring people together or to help shape even the discussion or the dialogue around intergenerational communities.
I have a something that we just did this week, and you know, my lens is different because I've already got this community where everyone's there. We're just trying to figure out how do you get everyone talking, and so, and this is where I was mentioning this whole greatest common denominator. If you can't do it with everything, can you pick one thing that maybe everyone would agree on? And so we just had a community conversation on mental health just this week. And we watched a film together, and then we did an intergenerational dialogue about it. So we watched it, and then I actually broke everyone up by generation to process the movie really quickly, and then to bring everyone back together to say, how do we approach solutions? And I saw gaps there, you know, how one might have, because, you know, we're all sitting there thinking we want to make sure our kids, you know, think about suicide rates and, you know, all of these different kinds of issues. Everyone obviously is concerned about this, and everyone's concerned about this conversation about mental health, especially since, you know, the adult statistic is 1 in 4, and the 13 to 18 stat is 1 in 5, right? These are high numbers, and it affects every household. And so how do you have the conversation? Here's how the intergenerational thing shows up, though. For our group who were our boomers, when they were in high school, someone actually having bipolar disorder, which wasn't even called that then, you know, so then it might have been cyclothymia, dysthymia, you know, whatever. And then when they were in high school, how that played out was you don't talk about it, you know, look that way, nothing's going on, everything's fine, you know. And then you have your Gen Xers where the world felt crazy to them when they were in high school, and so, you know, everything was a mess. And so it was like out there, but we weren't talking about solutions. It was just everything was a mess. You have Kurt Cobain suicide, and, you know, these things are starting to happen. The school shootings weren't there yet, but you're just seeing these like individual tragedies. There's that. Then fast forward to now, you have our kids growing up, and there's anxiety, depression, there's pills, there's, you know, all these things. It looks different, and how everyone approached it was completely different from how transparent they were or were not. Social media, how does that play in? You know, what's good, what's bad? And there were gaps there. There were some parts where you have younger people talking, and some of our more seasoned folks who were in that conversation were completely silent. Completely silent. And then so something as simple as social media, and you bring that up and people say, that's the reason why the bullying's happening and that whole kind of thing. And then you have young people saying, actually, there are these movements. There are people like, you know, text the suicide hotline number and you can reach 1,000 people in 5 minutes to give them this help. And just by having the people in the room, it changed perspectives on, oh, that's where this came from. You know, where did this thing come from? And if you understand the problem better, then maybe we have different approaches to solutions. Maybe this thing that was scary for you isn't that scary anymore. But we had to get all in the room to do that. And we couldn't have done it if we said we're going to approach all these topics. We picked one topic that everybody could agree on and got them in the room for that. But then what it's going to open up, what I believe that work will do then is, well, if we could talk about this, and I really liked your idea on that, I wonder if we could talk about this one. And then if we could talk about that one, could we talk about this too? But then that's where I go all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, that wisdom transference. We saw it beginning to happen there, but we had to pick one thing and start there.
Thanks.
You gotta have the follow through too with it. I think one of the gaps that we still struggle with is apathy. So I wrote it down because in not having the right people at the table. So I see this with ARP is working really hard on this too, is making sure that somebody with a new app or the newfangled technology, that they're not assuming what is needed, but that you actually ask what is needed. So, you know, that's a gap. Are we bringing in and are we assuming there's things not going on when there actually might be some, but we just don't know about it and we don't know how to tap into it? And so do we not have the right people at the table? And I think that's one of the things, especially with memory loss and with this looming of, you know, 45% of people over 85 in the next 10 years are going to have some form of cognitive loss. That's 1 in 2 people. 1 in 2. We need conversation, and that's got to be included in the multi-generation, and yet it's still a gap. It's still, well, maybe they'll come up, I'm hoping they're going to come up with a solution by then. I'm like, well, I'm already there. So, but we gotta figure out who are you bringing at the table? Who is identifying that there's a problem, and is it really one? And so do we already have some multi-generational? Because I'm hearing you do. I really am. I'm hearing that Columbus has a lot of multi-generation stuff going on. And so what I'm also hearing is, how do we capitalize on it? And how do we grow it? And because you really do have some amazing resources right here. Mm-hmm. You're our capital.
I think one of the things, and this might really not need to be said, but that I love that Kimberly always has an activity that creates conversation. So sometimes that's the best way to bring people to the table who have an interest, is really, it isn't, we're going to bring you all together because we're going to talk about this really deep topic, but we're going to bring you together, a little bit of everybody from everywhere, to do an activity together that then allows for conversation. I think that's a brilliant way to get people to buy in and understand and see that things aren't quite so frightening with young people, and the distrust goes away just by being able to share in an activity and then have a conversation at the end of it. I think is way better than just bringing together to converse.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any last thoughts or comments? We talked about policy issues. We talked about regulations. We talked about intentionality. We talked about small, manageable, sustainable activity that will begin to get this process going, where people can own that process. We talked about working together, using this as an opportunity for a real wake-up call about how we value the elder, how we value the child, and how we value all the people in the middle. And call that an experience core that allows us to look back so that we can look forward. So Sankofa is the word of the day for our panel. But I would like for you, if you have any short, last-minute comments, could share a reward. What happens? What's a reward for building intergenerational communities?
Just one. I think a mentally and physically healthier community.
Great.
I think it's, for me, the wisdom transference is an essence. It's needed. Our culture, whole culture needs that wisdom transference.
Thank you.
I think it's impacting the family to be part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie?
Just that really deep belief that all people are valuable, and it doesn't matter what their age is, that they have talents and ideas and resources to bring to a community that make that community stronger.
I wrote down collective intelligence. I think it's not looking to think someone else has the answer, but that all the brilliance is in the room. All the brilliance is already in the community. And to figure out how to tap into people so they feel valued enough to give you the gift of their story to solve the problem.
Thank you. So today we talked about redefining age and generation with Deborah Shinosky from AARP, Michelle Terrestano Amato from Oberlin, Director of Creative Art Therapy and a Dimension Specialist. Jenny Hoover, Director of Kendall Early Learning Center at Oberlin. Maggie Spangler, Executive Director of the Columbus Early Learning Centers. And Kimberly Braswell, Director of Student and Community Engagement for Bexley City Schools. Thank you so very much.